back, everyone, to the November 18th, 2025 meeting of the City Finance Committee. May I have a roll call, please?
Yes, we'll start with Committee Member Santa Maria.
Here.
Vice Chair Harmon.
Here.
Chair Friedman.
Here. All right, we are all here and ready to go. Any public comment, general public comment for items not on today's agenda but under the purview of the Finance Committee? Start in chambers. Don't see any. Is there anybody online wishing to speak? Please raise your hand in the app.
Chair Friedman, no hands are raised.
All right, so we get on to the item for today, and I will turn it over to Mr. DiMartini.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chair Friedman, members of the Finance Committee. I'm Keith DiMartini, and I'm the Finance Director for the city. I'm here with Ms. Natalie Licoli, the city's controller. Before I jump in, I just want to make one administrative announcement. The Finance Committee will be moving to have our meetings in City Hall council chambers starting in the beginning of the calendar year. Very exciting. So I just wanted to put that out there so members of the public are made aware of it well in advance. The committee members are aware. I think it'll prove to be a little bit more efficient. Also, we're going to leverage the technology in council chambers, which will help with some communication with our public, as well as Spanish translation services that are available in that facility. So,
Can I just say that since it's almost Thanksgiving, it is nice to know that we are finally getting away from the kids' table at Thanksgiving.
You said it, not me. Okay, so with that, we'll jump in, and I'll make that announcement again in the December Finance Committee meeting, just so that there's plenty of time. We'll also do a press release, update website material, so on and so forth. Okay, so we're here today to talk about the first quarter financial review for fiscal year 2026. We'll start with a recommendation to the Finance Committee today, which is to hear a report from staff on the status of revenues and expenditures through the end of the first 3 months, ending to September 30th, 2025, receive the fiscal year 2026 interim financial statements, recommend that council adopts a resolution amending the budget. There are a series of budget adjustments that are included in your staff report today, and also recommend that council adopt a resolution amending this position salary control resolution because of the few salary and position changes that staff is recommending today as well. The agenda, just like prior meetings, will first give a general fund overview. We'll talk about the enterprise funds. We'll go through the budget adjustments, again, which is a very detailed report attachment to this staff report. We'll talk about the handful of position changes, and then we'll take questions, public comment, and discussion. So let's first start with the general fund. We always like to show the general fund multi-year forecast as we kick off this presentation. This graph is very familiar to all of you. It is a projection of our general fund revenues in the dotted green line and the general fund expenditures in the solid red line. And again, what it shows here is that although our revenues are growing, they're not growing at the same rate as our expenditures. Our expenditures are growing at a much higher rate, and it shows the gap between our revenues and expenditures widening as the years go on. That steep uphill line portion in our revenues from fiscal year 2025 to 2026 really represents the implementation of the full fiscal year of our Measure I sales tax that the voters approved just about a year ago. So that's really the reason why it really realigned our budget. But that, again, is not going to solve all of our budget challenges for years to come. We will need to continue to implement other solutions to help balance our budget going forward. So this is the table version of the graph that I just showed on the prior slide. It shows the adopted budget in fiscal year 26 with the adopted budget deficit of $1.6 million, and that deficit only increases as the years go out. Increases to $5.9 million in 2027 and then goes out further. But as we've discussed in prior Finance Committee meetings, we believe that this deficit is likely to be worse in fiscal year 2026 and 2027 based on information that we presented prior with our labor negotiations and just the sort of the softening of our sales tax and other types of tax measures, tax revenues that we have on the books. This graph here is just a pie chart representation of our general fund revenues on the left and our expenditures on the right. A couple of takeaways on these graphs is that on the left, the city is not solely reliant on one or two taxes to fund our general fund operations. We do have a wide variety, and that's a really good thing because sometimes if one tax revenue is not performing as well as we would like, hopefully another one is picking up the difference. And so that's a really good thing for our organization. Some cities around California are only reliant on one or two primary taxes. And then on the expenditure side, you can see that that the general fund taxes pay for people, really. It's 2/3 to 3/4 of the budget, depending on how you look at it. It really pays for the people that serve this community, that wear many hats. So now just talking a little bit about the Q1 forecast now for the general fund. There are two tables here on this graph. The first one is pure general fund dollars on the top. And then we do break out Measure C as a separate table because Measure C primarily funds capital projects, and so it's not your operating budget that we want to focus on the top. And so the top one does show the adopted budget, showing the deficit of $1.6 million. The revised budget shows $4.9 million because of changes that are being proposed in the budget as well. And then you can see so the projection there for the revised budget is $4.9 million. We do believe, though, that the year-end projection for fiscal year 2026 is going to be closer to $6.7 million. And there's a table in your staff report that identifies that in great detail. And we'll be sure to include that column going forward on these slides as well. Showing a deficit higher as of the Q1 report is very common. So the $14.1 million deficit that you see there is not meant to be alarmist. It's very common at this point of the fiscal year. And the reason why is because we don't get our first batch of property tax dollars from the county until December. So we have not collected any property tax dollars as of the end of September 30th. Again, that's very common. We know about that. It's not something to be worried about. It's very common at this point of the fiscal year. For Measure C, you can see that the big change in Measure C really is from the adopted budget expenditures of $35 million to the revised budget of $75 million. And again, that's very common. We know that occurs year after year. And the reason is because we carry over appropriation from prior fiscal years for projects that council has approved of where we haven't completed those projects yet. Again, many of these capital projects span multiple fiscal years, and when we let out a construction contract, we have to have all that money available and appropriated up front. And that money might be spent over a series of 2 or 3 fiscal years. Again, very common, so not anything to be concerned of. And so then this slide shows an update on our tax revenues in the general fund. Again, at this point of the fiscal year, because we only have 3 months of actual data, we really keep our projections for fiscal year 2026 in line with the revised budget. We really don't have enough data yet to really warrant changing it. I did mention that we believe that our sales tax numbers are a little bit soft. As you can see here, we're around 22 to 23%, and we're a quarter through the fiscal year, so it's coming in a little bit light, as I mentioned earlier. And then we show our actuals through Q1. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Licoli.
Good afternoon, members of the Finance Committee. I will move on with the short-term rental. So the short-term rental program has been in place, as we know, for 2 years. Based on the result for the first quarter, we can reasonably project that the source of revenue will exceed the fund received in fiscal year 25. The next slide is a slide summarize the general fund expenditure for both adopted and revised budget, along with the preliminary Q1 result in comparison to the revised budget. The general government spent 20% of revised budget, slightly below the forecast. Projection is in line with revised budget, with a slight reduction in expenditure for the Human Resources Department due to changes in position. Public safety use 23% of its budget, or show a total spending for $24.5 million at the end of the first 3 months of a new fiscal year. The police, the total expenditure is $14.2 million and project to stay in line with revised budget based on the current vacancy trend. Projection may change with additional hiring through the fiscal year. The fire department spent $10.3 million, or 24% of its revised budget. The fire department increased its projected spending by $3.5 million due to personal expenditure to meet contract negotiation obligations. Then we will move on to the community service that ended the first quarter below both revised and adopted budget. We have the park and recreation. The expenses are mainly cost of revenue. We will experience incremental increase attributed to building and vehicle maintenance, as well as increase for special project. At the end of our first quarter, the department spent 24% of its revised budget and do not project to make any changes at this time. The library, at the mark of the 3 month, 20% of the revised budget was spent. The library is now in full operational capacity after closure and repair for the fiscal year 24 and 25. Public Works spent $3.3 million or 22% of its budget. The department projects a slight reduction by $128,000 due to salary and benefit saving from staff turnover. Then we'll discuss the sustainability and resilience that manage 3 major projects. They have the emergency remediation project, the Lot 12 environmental remediation, and the removal of storage tanks that are adjacent to the stern RAF. This last project was initially targeted to the removal of 3 tanks, but a geophysical survey indicated that they actually have 6 storage tanks to be removed. The result of the survey and its cost will be available in January, and at this point, expenditure will need to be readjusted. Currently, the department uses only 18% of its revised budget. The community development spent $3.6 million or 21% of its revised budget. The community development anticipated a saving by almost $1 million, primarily in salary and benefits. So by this end of the first quarter, the general fund expenditure is $55.9 million, or 20% of revised budget. It includes the Measure C and non-departmental expenditure that are transferred from the general fund to other fund. The transfer to Fund 3010, Measure C, support the various capital maintenance, improvements, and projects. And on that note, I'm going to turn comment back to Mr. DiMartini.
Thank you so much, Ms. Licoli. So this slide here just summarizes the direction that the Finance Committee gave to staff a couple of weeks ago during the 2 Finance Committee meetings that we had in a row, where we talked about recommendations that staff was making and proposing to the Finance Committee. There were over 200 of them. And the direction that was given to staff during that Finance Committee, that last one, is now summarized on this slide. So we wanted the Finance Committee to see it. It's part of the Finance Committee agenda report. We're scheduled to go to the full City Council on December 2nd, when we are going to present this Q1 report to the full City Council as well. And then we're also going to talk through the recommendations from the Finance Committee about how to help us balance our budget in fiscal year 2026 and beyond. So again, the highest priorities that the Finance Committee communicated to staff were to look into increasing the cannabis excise tax up to the 20% voter approved limit, initiate a poll, which staff is currently working on, to assess the viability of possible revenue tax measures listed here, and then also analyze recreational vehicle camping at waterfront parking lots. The Finance Committee also communicated to staff that there are a number of items that were on the list that you are not recommending that staff proceed. Those are listed here, including not considering library closures or reduced hours of operation, not allowing short-term rentals throughout the city in a more larger geographic area, and then also not increasing parking fees. So those are articulated here. Again, you've already given us that direction, but we wanted it to be included in this presentation today. So I'll turn it back over to Ms. Licoli to talk about the enterprise funds.
Thank you, Mr. DiMartini. So now we will be speaking about the operating position for our enterprise fund. The water department revenue is currently tracking at 26% of budget, and it represents a positive variance of $3.9 million compared to the same period for fiscal year 25. Rate increase constitute the primary drive for this result. Despite a strong start, staff reviewed the seasonal variations in water usage, and they project the fiscal year end revenue to close at about 2.1% below the budget. Expenses are within expected trend, and projections are in line with the revised budget. So at the mark of the first quarter, the department reported a profit for about 3.7 million. Wastewater, for the first 3 months, wastewater revenue are on par with budget, or at about 25%. The expenses follow the same trend as last year and will reach the projection for 38.5 million. At this time, the department added a 1.2 million to its reserve. The solid waste division, which covered trash and recycling services, recorded revenue at 25% of budget, or an increase by 1.9 million with last year for the same period. This revenue growth is driven by an increase in waste service subscription, which in return led staff to revise its projection with an additional 3.4 million in revenue for fiscal year 26. Expenses are at 14% of budget due to saving from unfilled position and timing of certain payment to the county. So at the end of the first quarter, the department generated an additional reserve of 4.8 million, an increase by 2.6 million with last year. Then we have the clean energy that account for the procurement of clean and renewable electrical energy on behalf of the Santa Barbara community. The revenue represents 13% of budget and is 1 million lower than the same period in fiscal 25. With the recent development regarding liability of the fire in Southern California from last January, there is more uncertainty now about the rate and what they will come about in January. So at this time, the department revised its revenue projection by 1.8 million. Power supply costs are shaped by the state energy market. Better market conditions mean that staff has secured power purchase agreement for the year. That will result for this year in up to 6 million in saving. Projections are adjusted accordingly. So at this time, expenses are 27% of budget. So for the clean energy department, they ended up the first quarter at this point with a loss of 7.7 million. The airport reported revenue at 8.1 million, concluded the first quarter with a new record-breaking passenger activity. August marked an all-time high. There's as well 2 new non-stop routes will be launched in April 26 that will bring a total of 14 non-stop routes. Operating expense for 9.1 million are expected. Variances with last year attributed to payroll cost and increase in transfer for capital outlay. Projections have been slightly adjusted upward. At this time, the airport reported a loss for 1 million. The waterfront sustained its operation through various revenues such as lease, slip, and parking fees. The department is currently experiencing a similar trend as last year, and no change in projection are indicated at this time. Currently, the department shows a positive operating result. The following department is the downtown parking. They reported a revenue of 2.5 million or 25% of budget. Hourly parking revenue increased by roughly $60,000 over the same period as last year. The positive changes are due to increase in occupancy due to the Saturday farmers market that was moved downtown, as well as downtown parking staff reinstating the late night operation of the parking lots on Friday and Saturdays. Expenses are 22% of budget. Staff made minor changes to the projection and currently show a profit. And finally, the golf. The golf fund supports the operation of the municipal golf course. The department revenue reached 29% of budget and show a slight increase in expense in relation to last year for the same period. It is due to increase in capital outlay transfer. The department does not have any change to its projection with budget and still shows strong consistency in its operation. Then we will move on to the proposed budget amendment. And budget adjustment requests for the first quarter have been submitted for your approval. And listed on this slide are few of the requests. And on that note, I will pass it back to Mr. DeMartini.
Thank you so much. So we'll just talk about a few position changes and salary changes that are included in the quarter one report. Those are listed here, and they're described in detail starting on page 4 of the Finance Committee agenda report. The first one is in the airport department. It's really just changing the salary of the assistant airport director position because of the reporting relationship with the project manager position. So it's not really sort of a reclass, it's more of a salary change. Also with Public Works, there's a reclassification of a position from the facilities maintenance superintendent to a supervising engineer. And then there are also a number of salary adjustments for many positions in the supervisor's unit, and then a couple of positions in the administrative functions of the fire department, and mostly related to compaction. It's an analysis that the Human Resources Department does to ensure that there's a correct level of differentiation between salaries for positions that might report to another position. And so that's sort of a normal process that occurs, and we like to adjust those salaries as part of our quarterly review process. And those are, again, detailed in the Finance Committee agenda report. So that concludes our presentations. We'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you very much.
All right, any questions? Not seeing, I had, well, I'll open to public comment, because more of a comment. So first, is there any member of the public that wishes to speak to this item? Not seeing in chambers. Online, if you'd raise your hand, are there any members?
Chair Friedman, no hands are raised.
All right, I'll close it. I do have a comment. If you pull up slide 13, it relates to the recommendations that are going to be going to council. So after the discussion at the last Finance Committee meeting, the issue, it relates to cannabis. One of the things that came up, and I'd like to include as a recommendation, and I wanted to get the feedback from my colleagues as well, if you'd like to include it, is in addition to looking at the tax, if we could look at increasing sales, and by that, it would look at what the process would be, and to include a 4th dispensary, but located within the funk zone area. So just get information from staff as you're looking at things over time. One, is it even worth pursuing? Would we be able to raise additional sales so that we could generate additional revenue? And if it was specifically in that location, because it is an area that has more frequency of tourists than the current. So wanted to throw that out there. Member Harmon?
Thank you, Chair Friedman. I'm happy to include that as direction out of deference, but just I think for our staff's knowledge, and I guess for those listening, I'm not supportive of adding additional dispensaries, and I personally do not want to pursue that line of revenue generation and will not be supporting it in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Santa Maria?
Thank you, Chair Friedman. I have a bit of, I don't know, it's more of a question / comment, but I would be curious if our city staff can pull numbers on, how much additional revenue are we actually going to get from, like, how much are we getting right now from the tax, and then how much will we be getting, because there aren't that many. It's not, the frequency of dispensaries in the city is not the frequency of grocery stores, right? It's not that many. And so I'm curious to see how much the increase would, maybe different tiers of it, because I don't know if we're going up to 20 or not. But I want to see, like, how would this even impact our budget? Is it going to be in a minor way, a large way? But I would say the funk zone being in my district, well, I'll speak to that in a sec. Maybe give staff a chance to respond.
Committee Member Santa Maria, thank you for that question. So I'll ask committee members to look at slide 9 on the presentation. The cannabis excise tax is the second tax from the bottom. So you can see that we budgeted about $1 million a year in total for all cannabis excise tax revenue. It has come down over the last couple of years. It used to generate like 1.4 million, maybe, I think was the peak, if my memory serves me correctly. It never has been a real large revenue source for the city operations. So it's a good question, right? And that's like, I think the tax is 6% on retail. And so if you increase it by 20, You could do a simple calculation that says, okay, maybe it'll ratchet up proportionally, but I don't think it's that simple, right? Because there will be a point of the tax being so high that it will really reduce sales. And so we not only will reduce our excise tax when that occurs, but it will reduce sales tax as well, and potentially business license tax revenue as well. Also, there's the relationship between sales that occur in a retail establishment versus those that happen on the black market. And then there might be other issues that we would want to confer with maybe the police department or city attorney's office in that regard. So it is a complex economic analysis that might need to be occurred. There's no simple way to do it. But I think that's part of the consideration for opening up another retail establishment or changing the rate. Those are all things to consider.
Thank you, Director. I almost called you Friedman. Sorry, DiMartini. I'm getting you all confused. But to Chair Friedman's point about exploring opening up another location, the Funk Zone being in my district, I really would want us to make sure that we're speaking to the community around. Like, this can't just be like we're imposing a dispensary on the Funk Zone. I'm not saying that I'm against it necessarily, but I want it to be something that we explore in a very thoughtful way, where as we are evaluating whether this is feasible and whether it would actually be beneficial, that the community input is included. And I think that goes without saying, but I feel compelled to just really make sure we make that point. But a question that I had with this is a little bit about what Mr. DiMartini mentioned. Raising the tax on cannabis, I do have concerns about whether eventually that'll reach a tipping point to where people will simply want to go and shop at Goleta dispensaries or any others, right? I mean, we're not that far away from other locations that people could go to. And so I do want to make sure that we're balancing it with, if we're increasing the sales tax, the cannabis tax, excuse me. One is really making sure that we are conferring with those retailers and trying to figure out like what's going to be a good balance so that they don't go out of business either, unless that's what folks want, but I don't think that's what's on the table here. And I really am encouraged by Councilmember or Chair Friedman's, suggestion, because I do think it's worth exploring, with the cannabis legalization in the state, is making sure that we are, as much as possible, providing or avoiding as much as possible that our residents are going into the black market for something like this. It's both recreational and medicinal, so for whatever reason that people are using it, I think that as a city, we would also be safer if we are more in line with doing things safely and legally. So I would support exploring that, but I think it'd also be worth maybe exploring maybe in other locations in the city, and just trying to figure out like where would be the best place to do that, and not just limiting it to the Funk Zone.
Thank you. I have a follow-up question, and clearly there's a lot more conversation that's going to happen around this, so I don't need to get too deep, but I did get some feedback about my position on this after the last meeting, and I just want to be very clear. The tax that we're talking about here is for recreational license holders. There is a separate class of licensees for medicinal cannabis sales, correct?
Yeah, Commission Member Harmon, that is correct. Yeah, these are purely
Recreational, which
non-prescription related.
And recreation is important. I'm not saying people shouldn't have fun. I'm saying that this idea that we are taxing a medicine, something that is prescribed by a doctor or has some health antecedent specifically related to an illness. I just want us to be super clear with the public. We are not talking about taxing medicinal cannabis. And I think it's incumbent on us to be very clear about what we're doing. And just to maybe address the elephant in the room for me around my position on this is it's really about this being a luxury. And I'm trying to find opportunities to generate revenue that does not look quite so much like a regressive general tax. We don't have a lot of opportunities for that in the community. And I would also say, I think we do have to be very mindful about folks going to the black market to purchase their cannabis. But on the other hand, I think we've seen a real sort of flattening out over the years, such that we already know it's already very expensive to buy cannabis from a dispensary. We already know who's going to go to a dispensary regardless of the cost and who's going to buy their joint from the neighbor. Like, this is already, I think and that is like not a very nice way of putting it, but I think my point is that I think we've already seen that happen in the market. And so we have some ability here to raise revenue. And so I just want us to be sure that we are not sort of accidentally entering into the debate around cannabis all over again. So that's really not, I have no interest personally in doing that whatsoever. And I want to be very, very clear about that.
All right, thanks for the discussion. I just wanted to clarify, and these are all good points. I am not committed to going forward with one. I want more information with the fourth one. And to your point, exactly right. I wasn't trying to say funk zone specifically, but that was the one that comes to mind when you're looking at where there's a high number of tourists that we're not capturing it. If there's other areas that we could look at, I fully support looking at it. Because it gets to Councilmember Harmon's point also is we do have to be cognizant if we're trying to look for new revenue. You can tax it and hopefully it won't decrease, but if you can look at where we're missing opportunities to get the actual sales, that's why I want to bring it up. And within the coastal zone itself, there's a whole different process with our local coastal plan and coastal commission and all that, that staff could come back and say there's a lot of resources that we would take and it might take from other priority initiatives that even we don't know what those are. And so I just want to have that conversation while we're looking at this now and see where it goes and make my decision at a later time based on whether we move forward with that. So, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Friedman. Just a quick follow-up to that, and maybe our city attorney or others can maybe walk me through some of the legalities of this. But as we're talking about increasing revenues, I'm curious about us being, since we are a tourist hotspot, have we looked at other cannabis revenue sources? So in other places where they'll have I think they're called like lounges, it's kind of like a bar. It's kind of like what we have on State Street, right? But it would be a controlled place where you purchase the cannabis there, use it there, whatever. I'm sure I'm sure there's a lot of, regulations and all of that would go into it, but I've seen those be popular in areas that get a lot of tourists and people will go and for that experience, right? And so it's one thing to capture the purchases of folks who already live in the community and maybe are visiting and they'll go and maybe buy something from the dispensary. But if you're thinking about our tourists are not lighting a joint in a hotel room. You can't do that, or in an Airbnb. Like, they're going to be getting fined, and so they don't really have a place to consume it safely and legally if they're taking the recreational route. And so I'm curious if there's a way that as a city we could tap into that potential revenue generating source. And I might not be making sense because I don't know too much about it, but I've seen this in other cities and just curious about if we could even explore what that could look like in the city.
Councilmember Santamaria, thank you for the feedback. I mean, I think that, when the work was done on the cannabis ordinance originally, that may have been part of the discussion, but that's the direction that we want to receive from Finance Committee members and council through this process. If there's an appetite or consideration to maybe explore other retail type opportunities or lounge experiences, that's the feedback we want to receive. It will require staff to do some analysis and come back to you with maybe some options to consider. That's part of this process.
And Committee Member Santa Maria, also just to add to that, what Mr. DiMartini was saying. So adding kind of the lounge or bar situation, that's a whole land use issue. And it's highly regulated already. So we would need to go back. It's not just the revenue side of things, but we would need to go back and evaluate a whole program around that and what would be permitted, what wouldn't, where, how many, all of that. We went through extensive evaluation of it when we first opened or allowed the dispensaries and the off market, and there's a number of different categories. So it would be a large question that we would get into. But if you can always direct staff to start investigating into that.
Thank you. This feedback is really helpful because I wouldn't want to say we should or shouldn't do it myself, of course, because we need everyone to vote, but I think in order for us to even consider this or even direct staff to explore this, it would be worth it to know if, would it even generate revenue? Like, would it actually be something that is worth investing our resources in? Because our staff's already pretty stretched thin, to say the least. So I don't want to necessarily add another project if we don't think it's going to be a decent revenue generator. But I don't know if Chair Friedman, you'd be open to adding just maybe exploring that in terms of revenue generating, just so that we could get some information for council.
Yeah, I think that's a good, that's what this exercise is for with all the different recommendations. And so it would be helpful, maybe for the wording is look at additional cannabis-related sales opportunities, whatever those might be, and then bring that back. So bring that to the council and then get that information and see. And it might be a non-starter once we get that information, or there might be something there. I look at the RV issue last month. It seemed to be a non-starter, and then all of a sudden it became something that we were supportive of, so who knows? But we have a hole to climb out of, and we need to look at everything. So this is something that we're looking at, and we're not wedded to it at this point. So are you clear, Mr. DiMartini, on just on how to add that in there?
Yes,
Just wanna
Chair
make sure.
Freeman, we are clear. We will add that into this slide for the council presentation on December 2nd. Thank you.
Any other comments before we go to the motion?
Yeah, I'm happy to second the motion, or I just want to, again, be clear. I respect that the creativity, both my colleagues, and there's just clear need to generate revenue. And happy to have this explored at council, but for just the sake of transparency, I won't be supporting either idea.
All right,
Thank you.
point taken. So now we do need to approve the financials and the staff recommendations. So is there a motion to approve the staff recommendations?
Committee Chair Friedman, did you want to add the direction to staff to that recommendation then and make a motion for that?
Oh, yeah, so can we, approve the staff recommendations plus the recommendation to add the cannabis to the overall revenue generating discussion for council.
So moved.
Motion's been made. Is there a second?
Second.
Second. All in favor? Aye. No opposed, abstentions. Passes unanimously. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.